So without further ado, Elizabeth Ann Bailey Seton, the American Patriot. Okay, so let's give some historical context of what's going on at this time. She was born in 1774, okay, pre-revolutionary New York. So tensions were high within the colonies, and colonists wanted separation from the crown. They wanted independence, representation. You know, they're in a fighting mode. They just want to be themselves. They want to be a separate entity. And delegates from Massachusetts were passing through New York on the way to Philadelphia to gather for the Continental Congress. So you can see early America is developing, and Elizabeth Ann Seton was born in the middle of it. And names that we come to know and love today, you know, way back in history textbooks, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, these people were living and breathing during this time. Those were their streets. The same streets we walk on today and were Fifth Avenue and all these lights and sounds, they were walking on. But we also have to think about the feminist influences. Now this is a little bit later, so 1792, so Elizabeth was still, you know, she was young, but she understood what was going on. Now British literature found its way to the New Land. So Mary Wollstonecraft wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Women, and this had a profound impact on the women of the colonies, especially New York. And also the prominent leaders. So John Adams actually called his wife a disciple of this woman. Women were fueled by this, and they said, we're not property. We're not our husband's property. We need education. I want to run my own business. So Elizabeth took this and took these feminist aspects to go on with her mission. So a patriot in the fight for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what is a patriot? What defines a patriot? So a patriot is someone who's honest, neighborly, they're hardworking, they're people who put others before themselves. So doesn't that sound a lot like Elizabeth Ann Bailey Seton? Did she not do that? She was honest not only with herself, but with her calling that she received from God. And that calling was to unite people, and that's what she certainly did. She united our country, she united the women, she united the Sisters of Charity, especially the Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth. She united us in this room right now, and she united 3 communities that came together to sit and watch Elizabeth of New York. So let's go all the way back to 1774. Forget about 2017. So she was born on August 28th to Dr. Richard Bailey and Catherine Charlton. Now, her father was a famous doctor of the time. He fought for the immigrants and made sure that they had access to health care. And at that time, the yellow fever was ravenous. Immigrants are coming off the boats from all these countries and bringing with them the disease. Because if you think about it, these boats were not sanitary. They were probably, you know, a few feet long, to say the least. Horrible conditions. There was no bathroom. So they brought along all of that to New York. But Elizabeth saw that firsthand. And it's important to note and remember that she came from a high member, well, she was a high member of society. She rubbed elbows with the future presidents. She attended balls and theaters and galas. She was the 1% that we talk about today. But yet she still saw the poor. And she had an empathy of a saint. And for the first time she felt. So when she saw those faces on the streets, that haunted her for the rest of her life. But not in a bad way. But she answered to God's will. And God's purpose for her was to see those faces so that she could carry on the fight for life. Shortly after and before she founded the society, she married William Seton. Now, during that time, he was in the business of shipping, and the shipping business was crumbling. And Elizabeth stepped up and became a businesswoman. Well, you can say, well, okay, well, why is that strange? Because at that time, women had no power. They had no legal identity from their husbands. They had no training, nothing. They were just property. Taking what she learned from the feminist movement, Elizabeth stood on her own 2 feet in a male-dominated world, essentially breathing life into the American dream that William had. It's also important to remember that William was dying at this time of tuberculosis. So she not only had to deal with the business, her husband's death, but also a mother of 5 children. And then she wanted something a little bit more. She wanted something to call her own. So with her and Rebecca, William's sister, founded the Society for the Relief of Poor Widows with Small Children. And they would go door to door begging for money. They would sew clothes to give to these widows and their children. At one point, they gave close to 420 widows and 150 children, all because that was her calling. But like with any gung-ho women's group, they faced a lot of backlash from the Episcopal community. The Episcopal community at that time was like, women cannot be traversing these streets by themselves, like that's a moral sin, that cannot happen. But yet, that did not stop Elizabeth Ann from pursuing her dream. And as you can see, in her fight against opposition, Elizabeth Ann continued to persevere by arousing the state legislature by petitioning for a $15,000 lottery that would help to benefit the society, in which she won and finally realized what women without male leadership can accomplish. She was a feminist at heart and a patriot fighting for her own people. So now, her husband is passing away in front of her very eyes. So she decides to leave home and take a trip across the ocean to Italy, because she believed, and her husband and the doctors believed, that the sunny shores of Italy and the clear, crisp air would help solve his issues. So she left behind 4 children, one of whom was very sick. She took her eldest, Anna Marie Seton, with her. And during that time, she had struggles with her beliefs. Do I stay a Protestant? Do I stay an Episcopalian? Or do I become a Catholic? And she turned to Antonio Felici, William's dearest friend, and said, help, I don't know what to do anymore. And at that exact moment, when she found solace in the Holy Eucharist, she became the voice of many immigrants. Immigrants at that time were all Catholics. They were French, Italians, Germans, they all came in with that belief system. And New York shunned them, because at that time it was illegal. Even, before the revolution it was illegal. And then that loathing carried on after it was founded. Elizabeth, even in her most desperate times, stood up for these immigrants. And the notion was that these immigrants are smelly, they're poor, they're rowdy. And Elizabeth, instead of putting herself, she thought of the immigrants. They're poor because they have no choice. They came here with no means, so why are we secluding them? Do we not have the freedom in this country to be our religion? Why does the religion have to define them or define us? She stepped down from her high position in society to get on the level of these people, to become one with them. She was oppressed by becoming one of the oppressed. And because of that, her platform, she used that to speak up and give them representation and the independence that they so rightly deserved. New York had nothing for her anymore. And she saw a tugging at her heart for something bigger and better. So along with the bishop, Elizabeth Ann packed up her bags, she took her children with her, and they went to Baltimore. And it was during this time that she started her pursuit of happiness. But in terms of education, she wanted to see poor children get the education that she had the privilege to receive. As a member of high society again, she was taught music, French, math, English, but these children roaming the streets of New York had no lives ahead of them. They were going to be poor forever because they never had the education. So again, remember how I said in the beginning how she was haunted by these faces? That's where this comes in. She wanted to give poor children and rich children equal opportunity, but also for women, especially young girls, because at that time, there was no education for them. So she started a school in Baltimore. She helped to start it in Packet Street. And from there, she then moved to a permanent location in Emmitsburg. And in Emmitsburg, that's where we have our connection with Mother Seton. In Emmitsburg, she created a safe space for poor, rich, women, men, everyone. Everyone was equal there. And she started with small means of one little room, not even, it's probably a quarter of this room. And she lived there with her children, and in the other room, sisters were sleeping on the floor. And then in the morning, they would pack up their things, put them to the side, and that's where they would have school. All because she understood the value of education and needed to spread it. So you're going to say, okay, well, this woman was from a million years ago. This one was from 1,000,000 years ago. What does she have to do with me? She's our connection to everything about this country. The Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth are a direct descendant of the Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph that were founded by St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. And the sisters continue this fight, this fight for liberty, this fight for life, this fight for the pursuit of happiness. They serve in El Salvador, they serve in Haiti, they serve in educational fields with the schools. And then doesn't the College of St. Elizabeth fall right underneath that? When Mother Xavier came here, she was an immigrant herself. And ever since that, the sisters devoted pretty much their lives to helping these immigrants, just like St. Elizabeth Ann Seton once did. And the sisters have their arms wide open for these immigrants. Their hearts are open, they have love ready to, willing and ready to be shared. And the immigrants once welcomed Elizabeth into their hearts. The Seton Associates. So the Seton Associates is a lay branch of basically the Sisters of Charity. And they continue on this fight. But each Seton Associate has their own devotion, whether it's immigration, whether it's education, whether it's helping the poor. And each of them have that fighting spirit within them that St. Elizabeth Ann Seton once did. So it carries on her mission and values. But there's also students like me who see the value in Elizabeth and carry her mission and values. And now that we have, now that we're co-ed, we can share this with our male students. It's no longer, oh, well, who cares? Maybe that's a girl thing. No. No. When we have interactions, this is Dave, by the way, but when we have interactions, or when he has interactions with the sisters because of an internship or because of an event, he can come out and spread that same love that St. Elizabeth Ann Seton once had for all of us, and still does. So you can say, well, how does this relate to this exact moment? Because of the fighting spirit that Elizabeth Ann Seton once had, and is now within all of us, we can be 3 communities who can sit under one roof here at the college. The sisters, the academy, us at the college, and watch a performance all about her. And then we can take home her fighting spirit and continue on her fight for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So before I end this presentation, on each table there should be a prayer. There's a couple copies at each. So I just want to end it all together as a group, because she was all about unity. So before we leave, I would like to unite everyone in the room by saying this prayer together. Lord God, thank you for blessing St. Elizabeth Ann Seton with great faith, hope, joy, and charity. I pray that her timeless example will guide me. I look at her humility to help me accept your will for my life. Let her grateful heart remind me to thank you for the joys and challenges of life. May her courage and perseverance inspire me to serve others, our church, and our country. Thank you, God, for Elizabeth Seton.